The command bridge of Revan's flagship was in chaos. Both Quarians and Geth could be seen rushing from one side of the room to the other, passing datapads or messages, or frantically tapping away at the terminals in front of them. But in the middle of that chaos, a robed figure stood stoically in front of a holotank listening as Admiral Rahn finished her report of the fleet movements. And we've pulled back the last of the recon fleet using the relays like you commanded. They are currently en route to reinforce various system patrol groups until we can figure out where the Reapers are going to attack from. Though I have to ask, why not just use the hyperdrives? The Dark Lady of the Sith clasped her hands behind her back as she coolly addressed the Admiral. Remember that this is likely going to be a long war, Admiral. The Reapers built the relays. They likely have a way to gather information through them as well. Letting them know we have a way of bypassing the relays this early would only have them swarm us immediately. Until they make a move towards us, I am perfectly happy to let them assume we are reliant on the relay network for long-distance travel like everyone else. Besides, the hyperdrives installed in most of our refits are nearly a third slower than using the mass relays. Shaylaran sighed. I suppose you are right. I just get excited thinking about how we can cut right through unexplored space without worrying about where the nearest relay is. Revan understood the feeling. Having a tool that could make some of the most basic issues a leader faced was incredibly tempting to abuse. For Shaylaran it was the freedom of movement the hyperdrive offered, while for Revan it had been the Starforge's ability to make logistics a joke. But the Empress also had experienced the result of what happened when your enemies discovered the existence of a tool like that. For her it had been after her capture by the Jedi and the Mind Wipe. The Starforge was such a threat that the Council decided to use her to find the station once it had fallen into Malak's hands instead of killing her and then rallying entire fleets to destroy it, even though they eventually failed. Or technically succeeded once Bastila had betrayed her and forced her out of the galaxy, leaving the Starforge in the Jedi's hands. Revan shoved those thoughts from her mind. While the hyperdrive engine wasn't nearly as pivotal as an automated shipyard, the Empress was still wary of announcing her advantage to the galaxy and making her empire the main focus of the Reapers. Not with how few fortified worlds she had or the handful of ships she had that weren't being torn apart for materials or hastily upgraded to her standards or wouldn't be completely disabled from a successful virus attack. I understand the temptation, but let's keep our best hands hidden for now. Yes, Empress. That concludes my report. Do you have additional orders? Revan thought for a moment. The Reaper's arrival had forced her to completely abandon most of her mid-term plans. Many of the shorter-term ones, like annexing the planets in her corner of the galaxy into her empire, were still unchanged if accelerated, but those wouldn't turn back the invasion. They needed allies. Allies that could provide actual assistance rather than resources like her deal with Omega did. The Asari Republic was likely out for obvious reasons. Even if the Jedi Order hidden among them wasn't out for her head, she had just stolen one of their colonies and had no intention of giving it back. The resources the shielding systems needed were just too precious right now. Maybe she would gift them a planetary shield for their homeworld when she had the ability to spare one, but for now the Republic would be at least slightly hostile towards her. The Solarians were a possibility, but while they had warships, everything Revan was told and could dig up about them was that they were middling at best compared to the other Council races. Top-of-the-line technology-wise, however, the race of amphibians focused on stealth and sabotage. Having small teams infiltrate unnoticed and using their technology to cripple their enemies without them knowing they were there. Their ships simply weren't designed to trade blows with an enemy. It was possible, probable even, that the Solarians had simply hidden their best warships, but they would be too small in number to make much of a difference when outnumbered by a Reaper battle group. That issue extended to the smaller races as well. No matter how advanced their ships were, they simply didn't have the numbers to offer. And with the Batarians practically annihilated, that left the Systems Alliance and the Turians as the only militaries with the numbers needed. What is the situation like in Turian space? Despite having a better relationship with the Systems Alliance, they were simply too far away at the moment. Practically on the exact opposite side of the galaxy, honestly. From what little we know, bad. Shailaran replied. Unlike the other council races, the Turians usually have their fleets patrolling all over the galaxy. Apparently there was only a small defense fleet at Palavan itself that was quickly overrun. We don't know much more than that. Revan hummed as she considered things. Cancel the orders for the recon fleet. Have them and any other messenger ships we have start heading to last known positions of any human or Turian patrols or fleets and see if you can convince them to begin gathering up at our southern border. If they refuse, give them the coordinates and move on. And what will your battle group be doing? I think 3 harrowers and 12 escorts will be enough as a scouting force. We will head for Palavan and either liberate the planet or at least attempt to evacuate the Turian leadership. If they are still alive anyway. Oh. Keela, the whole planet, how could anything do that so quickly? Palavan was burning. It shouldn't have come as a surprise considering what was reported to have happened to the Batarians. But hearing a report that planets were being scoured of intelligent life and seeing it in person could just not be equated. Nearly all of the bridge crew stared out of the main view screen, frozen in horror at the fires that covered nearly 80% of the visible surface. For such things to be visible from space. It was a clear sign of just how much power the Reapers could bring to bear. Even Revan wasn't fully immune to the sight. She had seen devastated planets before, ones long dead for one reason or another. She had even seen devastated ones as the result of her own orders or on the orders of Malak once he had seized control of the Empire. But even she had never seen such total destruction. Under her orders, specific regions of a planet, usually military or infrastructure in nature, would be bombarded until they were no longer capable of being a threat. But in the end it would all be things that could be eventually rebuilt. Malak, drowning in his sadistic urges, preferred to wipe all traces of civilization off the map and simply leave the handful of survivors to struggle among the ruins. The Reapers had physically landed on the planet and did their best to scour every last Turian from the surface in a horribly methodical way that it chilled the Sith Empress to her core. But they could not afford to simply watch the destruction forever. They were not the only ones here. Scanners, I need a report on all ships in system. What are we facing here? The force-laced command jolted the young Quarian officer out of his stupor and back onto his console. It would have been more efficient to simply have a Geth man the equipment, but tensions between the two races had still not relaxed to the point that her Quarian staff would allow their ships to be piloted by a non-organic if it wasn't necessary. Revan rather agreed with them if not for the same reasons. We are seeing 36 capital-sized ships and a few hundred smaller escorts, ma'am. The sensor operator reported back. 1 capital and 5 escorts have broken off towards us on an intercept vector. Arrogant. Or at least that's what Revan would have assumed if this had been anything else. What little video they had of a single Reaper fighting the humans' 5th fleet nearly 3 years ago proved a single ship could deal with the equivalent numbers of Revan's battle group, and the escorts were likely to ensure fewer of them could escape. It was time to see how the weapons Revan had used to nearly conquer the Sky River galaxy compared to the machines that had destroyed theirs countless times before. Tell all ships to prepare for battle and raise deflector shields. She ordered. Have our escorts accelerate and spread out, and have all harrowers launch 2 waves of fighters and set up a defensive screen. Prep bombers for launch after we see how our weapons compare. And get firing solutions for all iron cannons on those ships. I want every ship targeted on the first volley once they are in range. We only have one chance to surprise them, let's make it count. The rush of orders snapped the rest of the crew out of their daze as they began scurrying to carry them out, and slowly the rest of the battle group followed suit. Revan could only lament that she was unable to perform battle meditation. Either the light or dark version would have eliminated any hesitation. It was an old complaint, but one she was re-signed to. The technique required a uniquely flexible mindset that was simply anathema to Revan's own, and there was nothing she was willing to do to change that. She would just need to rely on some of her old tricks instead. While the Sith was barely proficient with divination or future sight, she was almost unparalleled in her old galaxy at farsight. Sinking her perspective into the Force, it allowed her to view the entire battlefield in detail that most strategists would offer their dominant hand for. Every move both sides made observed in real time and from multiple viewpoints when Revan was completely focused. That sort of information dominance meant it was almost impossible for a force led by her to be outmaneuvered unless her opponent could perfectly coordinate their own forces, such as Bastila had with battle meditation, and even then it took significant effort. So the group of eye drones the Reapers had sent ahead of them trying to flank Revan's battle group was swiftly discovered and countered by sending her own interceptors after them. But before the smaller ships could engage each other, the main force entered firing range. The Empress calmly gave the order to open fire and watched as the brilliant bolts of blue energy slammed into the enemy ships. Cheers went up at the sight of them actually affecting the Reapers, what lights were visible on their hulls flickering wildly, but Revan quickly ordered them to fire the turbolasers. Just as she suspected, the ion cannons could disable some of the Reapers' systems, but their techno-organic nature meant core systems were at least partially unaffected. The weapon systems worked at least, Revan noted, as they quickly, if inaccurately, returned fire. The Reapers had no doubt been expecting to easily absorb the first few shots from the Imperial battle group on their shields and fire once they were in optimal position to damage or destroy as many ships as possible. They had paid for the assumption and were slowly getting picked off one by one. More cheers went up at what was probably the first space victory against the Reapers since the invasion started, and this time Revan allowed them a small celebration, knowing this would likely be the last time victory was so easy. The Reapers had allowed themselves to wander fat and happy directly under her guns and were surprised by a weapon they hadn't seen deployed against them yet. But now the element of surprise was gone, and they would no doubt adapt. Empress. 5 capital ships headed our way. 15 more escorts accompanying them. Reform formation and have the fleet focus on recharging shields. Revan said calmly. We surprised them the first time. Now it's time to see if we can beat them in a fair fight. The last of the interceptor wings has successfully returned to the hangar, ma'am. Aquarian reported while Revan focused on the tactical holo. Status? 3 fighters destroyed and 8 with minor damages. Replacements have already been rotated in, so the wings will be at full strength for the next deployment. That was good news. The galaxy as a whole had very little information about the Reapers' tools besides the husks that had been widely deployed before the main arrival and the handful of reports made about Sovereign's capabilities before it was destroyed. Something Revan and her admirals had been worried about was that the murderous machines would have small-scale fighters that vastly outperformed anything they could produce. And while the iDroids did have the advantage in speed and maneuverability thanks to the lack of a pilot, it wasn't so great that it couldn't be overcome thanks to the greater durability the ray shield systems offered Revan's own interceptors and the non-kinetic-based weaponry. In fact, even a standard SA fighter would theoretically be capable of destroying an iDroid one-on-one as long as its weapons were upgraded. A crucial factor, since as the war dragged on, both ships and experienced pilots would become harder to come by, whether Reaper forces would remain at the same level or improve. That the existing designs could compete should Revan manage to supply them with the weapons they needed meant that many more pilots would return after a fight, and that she could rely on them as more than blaster fodder to preserve her own forces. The bigger issue was the medium to large-scale ships. Revan wasn't immediately sure if the local Turian fleet had been crushed by superior numbers or simply because the Reapers outclassed them so much, perhaps a combination of both. But by debris alone it seemed for every Reaper they had destroyed, the Turians lost 3 to 4 ships of their own. Completely unsustainable. Drowning your enemies in your own blood only worked if you outnumbered them. Which they did not. Now it was time to see how the Reapers fared against ships not built following the design path they left behind fared against them. Enemies passing maximum effective range in 10 seconds, Empress. Orders. Launch 60% of our fighters, 30 of our bombers. I want them enveloping the enemy's flanks. Have the main battle line ready to split in wing formation 4 with the flag as the center point on my command. Once again, the bridge crew rushed to carry out their orders as Revan spread her awareness out into the force. 20 ships versus her own 15, not to mention the enemy reinforcements already in system and an unknown amount more on the other side of the planet. This was not a battle she could afford to get pinned down in. She nodded minutely to herself and confirmed her opening strategy. Enter formation. At her order, her escorts split off into 4 groups of 3, spreading out diagonally in all directions while the 2 other harrowers formed up in a line with Revan's ship in the middle. From there, every ship began slowly advancing while angling slightly away from the incoming Reaper group, creating a gradually expanding cone with escort-class ships at the edges and the larger, slower harrowers acting as a hammer. Iron cannons, focus on the capital ships. Once those are disabled, destroyers, focus on picking off their escorts. I want bomber groups targeting their main weapons, fighter groups, guide them in. All other guns, fire at will. Space erupted in a frenzy of lights as red turbolasers and blue iron cannons fired, as starfighters accelerated out into the void and dogfights broke out against the Reaper's starfighters. Revan could feel the deck below her vibrate slightly as the Harrower unleashed its considerable armament against the enemy. Then came the most excruciating part of a battle for a commander. Trusting others to do what was needed. Revan had given her orders. It was up for the ship captains to carry them out. Not only would attempting to micromanage them be detrimental, it would likely blind her to the reaction from the Reaper group. She was under no illusion that this battle would be as overwhelmingly one-sided as the first one. Instead, she expanded her vision and began looking for traps set by the enemy forces and how she could counter them. Have Fighter Group 6 break off, they are being led into an ambush. The Sith Empress ordered as she moved her viewpoint throughout the battlefield. And Bomber Group 3 redirected to Reaper Capital Ship 04. Its hull has a breach on its starboard side. I want proton torpedoes in that hole before it recovers its kinetic barrier. Hunter Groups, there is a squadron of I-droids targeting the aft of Escort 07. I want them destroyed. Revan continued barking out orders even as reports about ship statuses flooded in before her. So far, the combination of kinetic barriers and particle shields had prevented any major hits from the Reaper's main armaments, while ray shields were only slightly effective, but the constant strain of trying to deflect the main beam weapon even the destroyer-class Reapers used were causing some of the shield generators to come dangerously close to overheating or straight-out failing in some cases. 2 escorts had been targeted by multiple Reapers at once and had taken glancing hits that burned holes in their duralloy metal hulls. Minor damage from what she could see, but proof that even Imperial ship designs were able to be destroyed by the genocidal spaceships. It was not all bad news though. A particularly clever captain of one of her escort-class ships had taken to rolling his ship to spread the attack over a larger area, allowing different generators to take some of the strain even if it meant fewer guns available to face the enemy. By coordinating with the 2 other escort ships in his group, they had been able to focus fire on one Reaper after the other, destroying 2 of the enemy escorts and even one of the capital-class ships with a lucky shot to the core. And that was something else Revan quickly noticed. While the Reaper's kinetic barriers made missile and ballistic attacks almost futile, they did not perform nearly as well against the heavy turbolasers or proton torpedoes Revan's ships used. Make no mistake, the techno-organic hulls were incredibly durable and took several direct hits to damage significantly. But the Harrowers alone had over 30 turbolasers, not counting the rest of their armament. Even the capital-class Reapers were quickly getting chewed to pieces. Revan frowned as another 2 Reapers were destroyed. Even with the damage her fleet was accumulating, this seemed too easy. She focused her farsight on the rest of the system. More of the Reapers were breaking off from Palavan and vectoring towards her fleet, but they were taking very wide paths for it, almost like they were trying to encircle her. Ah, that was the trap. The Sith took a moment to look more closely at the remaining ships the battle group was engaged with to confirm her thoughts. The remaining Reapers were starting to ignore the increasingly damaged escort ships and were accelerating into the heart of her formation without attempting to finish them off, directly towards the Harrowers. Order all ships to reverse course and recall all starships. The communications officer paused and looked back at her and then towards the ship's captain. Are you sure, Empress?" he added belatedly. Revan pushed aside the desire to snap at him to follow orders. It was understandable. From their point of view, their side was winning decisively, even if it wasn't bloodless. Even if they couldn't fight every Reaper in the system, they could still destroy this group with little risk before the other enemies could get close. There was no reason to run away. Do it now. Revan's order gave no room for objection. But once the orders were delivered, she allowed her voice to soften a little and explain. The Reapers are preparing to ram our center directly. They no longer care if we destroy every ship here as long as they disable the Harrowers. Permission to speak? The ship captain asked, to which Revan nodded. Only Harrower 03 has shield generators in the yellow. If we simply rotate the Harrowers to lower incoming fire, even if all remaining Reapers managed to score direct hits with their main weapon, we should be able to shrug it off and maneuver away before their reinforcements got close. Even if the Reaper lands on the ship? Revan's question made the crew twitch. Understandable, since avoiding collisions in space was simply common sense. But the Reapers didn't share that belief. There was no reason for the leg segments to open as wide as they did otherwise, and now that the Sith was looking for it, she could see a few Turian wrecks that looked like they had been physically torn apart rather than from an explosion. This is just the first battle, Revan reminded them all. We've proven we can defeat the Reapers in a straight fight, we've shown with certain advantages we can demolish them. What we cannot do is throw away our lives by forgetting the bigger picture. There was some grumbling among the crew that hardened into determination as they reminded themselves that the galaxy was now at war. Some clearly didn't agree with Revan to retreat while they had the advantage, but all of them leapt back into their tasks with new focus. Nodding to herself, Revan gave the final orders to engage the backup FT-air drives and jump out of system to every ship where they would rendezvous before heading back to Imperial space. There was no need to show off the hyperdrives to the Reapers just yet. That would be a trump card for another time. It was just the first battle, after all, and they had already won where it mattered. Oh! Shepard fired her shotgun at the last husk remaining and took a bit of pleasure in how it exploded before looking around herself and frowning. They might have won this battle, but they had already lost where it mattered. Palaven and its moons were still burning. And neither her nor the Normandy could do anything about that. But they still needed the new Primarch out of here if there was going to be any chance of getting the Council to actually put effort into saving themselves and the rest of the damned galaxy. And as much as the commander didn't like it or them right now, she needed to put those frustrations aside and build alliances if they were going to gather the resources to build the Prothean superweapon Liara had found in the Mars facility. Area's clear, Shepard. Come on, the general is just up ahead. Garrus called as he jogged back up to her and James. It had been a welcome surprise to run into him on Mavi, but Shepard wasn't going to turn down a friendly face. Even if she was a little jealous, Garrus had managed to keep the blaster rifle Revan had gifted the Normandy specialists while her own was snagged by Alliance R&D, and she was back to using unmodded, mass-produced crap until she could source better weapons. Let's give him a moment to get sorted out, Shepard suggested, seeing General Victus organizing the remaining defenders after they had repelled the latest assault. James, any news from the Normandy about those issues earlier? Or about the mystery fleet that appeared on the other side of the planet? Nada, Commander. Not sure if there's a problem or the Normandy just isn't talking right now. The Alliance Marine replied. Damn. Okay. Let me know if that changes. The Normandy breaking down was just about the last thing they needed right now, but it had fled Earth while halfway through renovations. There was no telling what could break when pushed as hard as the Normandy had the last few days. But that fleet was also a concern. 15 ships of unknown design appearing out of FTA on the other side of Palavan, smack dab in the middle of a Reaper invasion. And the only reason they knew about them were a handful of surviving satellites relaying the information back to the Turian Central Command post. With the Turian fleet getting torn apart in space already, there simply hadn't been the resources or time to send a ship around to establish communications, so Shepard had no idea who they were or what they were doing here. Part of her hoped it was some client race of the Turians coming to assist. She didn't exactly know every model of ship in the galaxy, since if Palavan was retaken, that would make convincing the Turians to spare a few fleets to assist Earth much easier. The rest of her simply hoped those ships wouldn't bring more problems. All right, looks like he's done. Let's go get our Primarch and then get out of here, she said, seeing Victus making his way over to their group. Commander Shepard of the Normandy, the general started once he was within speaking distance. I know who you are, and I can't wait to find out what brings you out here. Taking a half-second to wonder if that was a good thing or a bad thing and ultimately choosing to just ignore it, Shepard got straight to the point. General, you're needed off-planet. I've come to get you. The general gave her an almost dismissive glare before shifting to look out towards the destroyed outpost. It will take something beyond important for me to leave my men, or my Turian brothers and sisters, in their fight, he responded. General Garrus started before he was interrupted. Vicarian, there you are, where did you go? Garrus chuckled. Heavy Reaper unit on the right flank. I believe your exact words were, get that thing the hell off my men. Appreciate it. Victus snorted. Now what's so important? Fedorian was killed, you're the new Primarch. Victus's mandibles opened in what Shepard assumed was complete shock. She seized the opening to try and convince the man to leave, even though every cell in his body was likely screaming at him to stay on, meaning to directly fight the Reapers. You are needed immediately to chair a summit and represent your people in the fight against the Reapers, she said softly, knowing from personal experience how hard what she was asking him to do was. Victus barely seemed to hear her as he slowly walked forward, eyes locked on Palavan, as he just watched the planet burn. I am Primarch of Palavan? He murmured. Negotiating for the Turian hierarchy? Yes. Shepard replied simply. The new Primarch looked back at her, and despite the alien biology, Shepard saw that this had shaken Victus more than the invasion itself. I've spent my whole life in the military. I'm no diplomat, I hate diplomats. War is your resume, Primarch, Shepard said, reinforcing the title. At a time like this we need leaders that have gone through that hell. And honestly, uniting these races may take as much strength as facing the Reapers. Shepard pointed all around them. See this devastation, Primarch? Double that for Earth. I need an alliance. I need the Turian fleet. Victus gave her a long stare that quickly hardened into resolve. Give me some time to say goodbye to my men, he said, to which Shepard simply nodded. Without him down here, there's a good chance we lose this moon, Garrus said quietly as the general walked away. Without him up there, Shepard replied just as quietly, there's a good chance we lose everything. Spirits, Garrus exhaled. You think you can win this thing, Shepard? The commander smiled a bit, even if the mantle of responsibility she carried felt just a bit heavier. Yeah, I don't know, Garrus. But I'm sure as hell going to give it my best shot.